Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I got two experts of the JFK assassination. It's always fun when you're able to talk about the JFK assassination because then you realize that you know a lot, but then there's a lot of areas where it's like, I don't have an answer for this. And that's what we come across when it comes to dealing with witnesses. I don't know how many films I've been through now and photographs where I'm like, this person has been labeled 4 times. Is it this person or is it this person? Because each site you check out, everyone goes, it might be this person. I'm like, yeah, you just wish someone would have did their job correctly and got the names of all these individuals at the time. But Tim, Craig, it's a pleasure to have you guys on the show. I'm going to have you introduce yourselves briefly. Tim, you can start, and then Craig, you're next.
Sure. My name is Tim Smith. I've been researching the assassination pretty much since the time of the showing of the Zapruder film in March 6th of 1975. And I remember when it happened, the assassination. I was 7 years old. I don't remember things very clearly because, like I say, I was 7 years old. But with the showing of the Zapruder film in March of 75, that kind of kicked in for me. And I've been kind of dabbling with it ever since.
All right, my name is Craig Ciccone. I'm an independent historian out of Detroit. I've been studying the JFK assassination for a little over 30 years, the JFK assassination and other political assassinations of the 1960s.
Now, I wanted to kind of focus this discussion starting off with talking about the reliability of eyewitness and ear-witness testimony. Obviously, if you're researching the Kennedy assassination, you are digging through either testimony or just documentation statements, affidavits, all these things. And there's a lot of things you can pick at, especially if you're really diving down into it, such as things that weren't addressed, such as certain witnesses that weren't addressed that I'm sure we're going to get into in this episode. But what are your guys' thoughts on the reliability of eyewitness and ear-witness testimony? Do you trust it when it comes later? Do you trust it more when it's initially, like the first day that it happens? And then also, how much do you go into when it comes to alteration of certain statements or just questions that were specifically not asked? And it's a long question, but what I usually ask is when you're looking at the FBI documentation, they kind of have a template for the questions that they're more focused on. It always ends with something about Oswald. Do you know Oswald at any time? Usually witness gives their statement. But also when they're describing a location, such as which we'll probably get into shots from the grassy knoll or things of that sort that certain witnesses will say, they always use the Texas School Book Depository as a base point. Such as west, north, south, or east of the Texas School Book Depository, they saw this. And it kind of is like a thing that sticks out in your memory, mostly because the Texas School Book Depository is like 12 damn syllables. So it takes a minute. But Tim, if you want to start off, and then Craig will go into you.
Sure. My approach, I think, is probably similar to yours, Robbie. I don't discount, nor do I quickly embrace ear and eyewitness testimony. I think it has to be handled case by case. I tend to believe John and Nellie Conley, for example. I think what they describe is probably what they perceived happened. Now, whether that's true, that's a different question. But I think when John Conley said, he was hit, and Nellie says, yeah, Kennedy had already been hit, and then I know my husband had not been hit at that point, I think she's recounting it as she remembers it. Again, it's a different question how accurate that is, but I tend to believe her. I can assure you the Warren Commission nor the HSCA did not believe her, nor did they believe John Conley. And yet the Warren Commission embraced Howard Brennan as the newborn son. I wouldn't believe anything that Brennan said. All you have to do is look at the Zapruder film. He's not even looking up in the Texas School Book Depository. He's looking over his shoulder at one point, and prior to that, he wasn't. And when the Warren Commission dealt with Brennan, they repositioned him on those reflecting pools to have him look directly into the front door of the Texas School Book Depository, which he was not in that position. He would have been facing east at the time, looking toward the buildings. And then, like I say, he turned his head over his shoulder. So he wasn't even looking at the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. So anything he says is absolute nonsense. And the Warren Commission had to know that. They had the film. In fact, this is so bizarre. They gave Howard Brennan one negative from the Zapruder film to identify himself. I mean, how ridiculous is that? Well, they couldn't afford to process the negative into an actual still photograph, but they didn't do it. So to me, that's a bizarre contrast, Brennan and the Conleys. I take the Conleys much more seriously than I do Howard Brennan. A final point, and then I'd like to hear what Craig has to say, is I discovered when I requested all the documents concerning Ida Dox, as you know, Robbie, that what I found out, and I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, is every witness, all 52 witnesses that gave public testimony on national television for the HSCA had already been interviewed with the exact questions they were asked that day. There was nothing new, no spontaneity. They had already been through the drill, and then they're just getting a rehash when they appeared before the committee. So how serious were they in an attempt to find truth? At times, not very much.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you, especially when you're talking about the reliability of eyewitness testimony. Look, we already know that it's faulty. Just like any other method used in investigating a crime, we never utilize or look upon one aspect of the investigation of a case as the end all be all. Even in autopsy, you don't just trust the photographs. You need the x-rays and the testimony of the person who did the autopsy to support that evidence. So nothing is the ultimate when it comes to reliability, whether it's ballistics, whether it's eyewitness testimony, whether it's anything like that. But we can, and that's our job as historians and people who are interested in cases like this, to assess the information. And there are so many factors, like Tim was just saying, there are so many factors in somebody's statement, how believable they are, what their background is, what their motivations might be. And Robbie, you asked about the chronology of somebody's statements, which my database, my eyewitness database, goes into. That is, every official statement that someone has made is in my book, and it's in chronological order. And I say right from the outset that I tend to rely more heavily on the earliest taken statement. Now, we also have witnesses that, because of the sixth floor museum at Dealey Plaza and their oral history project, people have come forward who were never interviewed by the FBI or any investigative body. And so it's a fresh account, but it is 60 years later. So even then you assess it by, okay, were they cajoled to come forward? Did they do it voluntarily? Were they thinking that they were going to be suddenly celebrities if they brought their story forward? So are they in local press? We have had witnesses like that who make a career out of their story being told after 40 or 50 or 60 years. And of course, you take that with a grain of sand. So I think in my book, I make that clear that all of these elements in judging the veracity of someone's statement, all of that goes into play. And it's for the reader to read the entire record, or as much of the record as possible, to make that determination. And that's why it's so important, even 60 years later, to make the record as complete as possible, to find these statements if they were made, and if no statements had been made in 63, get them now. And that's why the oral history project at the sixth floor museum is so important. However, it's incredibly flawed, because you talked about, again, Robbie, you asked about the FBI's patented questions. It ceases to become an interview at that point, and it's just a survey. If they're asking the exact same questions of every single person without giving them an opportunity to expand or expound upon it, or if they say something confusing, to have the FBI agent say, well, wait a minute, what did you mean by that? They didn't ever give that opportunity, apparently. So it's not just the eyewitnesses' recall that has to be questioned and looked at really with a fine-tooth comb. It's also the interviewer and what their motivation is. And did they ask questions? Did they even ask questions? Because in my master list of witnesses, I make a distinction between did not say and was not asked. Okay, so it's just as important to look at the interviewer as well, especially when you're talking about Warren Commission testimony. We have just countless examples of them leading witnesses in their questioning so they can get to the answer they want, not to the answer that the witness wanted to give.
Robbie, I think what Craig says is spot on, and let me elaborate what I mean by that. He talks about leading the witnesses. He's absolutely right, especially when it comes to medical evidence. My God, it's almost embarrassing to read. But here's one thing I noticed one day when reading the testimony of and I think there were 488 witnesses that testified for the Warren Commission. They didn't all testify. Some of them were deposed at doubts. But you know my point is that you never get clarification. I mean, read any of those witnesses and no one ever says, well, what do you mean by that? Let me ask it a different way. Compare that with the ARB and Jeremy Gunn.
Absolutely.
He is constantly saying, now let me say this a little differently because I'm not sure you understand what I'm saying. Or they would ask for clarification. You never get that with the Warren Commission. In other words, it's too sanitized. Something's going on because you know as well as I do, both of you, when it comes to the human condition, you know for a fact nothing is that pure. I mean, just in our discussion here today, there are probably going to be times that what exactly did you mean by that? Can you add? We're going to need clarification. Never in the Warren Commission do they do that, and they never did it really with the HSCA. Although probably a little bit better than the Warren Commission, but again, those things were all rehearsed ahead of time, so it was a fait accompli what was going to happen.
That's why the ARB was so important.
Yep.
Because they did the things that the Warren Commission was supposed to do and HISCA was supposed to do, but of course they never did. And I go back to the Oral History Project at the 6th Floor Museum. Stephen Fagan, who's the curator there and did most of the oral histories, he also failed in taking the lessons of the Warren Commission, HISCA, and the successes of the ARB, because he has these witnesses, and some of them had given either statements or testimony. He has a responsibility that before these witnesses come and give their oral history, he collects all of the statements that they had, and he has them look at them. Is this what you said, or to the best of your recollection? Because I know it's 60 years later, but is this your signature? Did you in fact say this? What was the experience like of being interviewed by the FBI or the Secret Service or the police or sheriff's office or even HISCA? But he didn't. And so there's still, even 60 years later, with all the lessons that we had in those 6 decades, Stephen failed to do it right. So, and I was going to point this out, Robbie, so I thought, since we're on this thread, I'll take it. I have instances of no less than 12 people that were mentioned in other people's statements taken by the 6th Floor Museum, the Oral History Project, where he has a witness, and that witness says, I went down with my family, my mother, my father, and my 2 adult siblings. And Stephen doesn't ask, well, what were their names? Or can we contact them? Or did you talk about it? Or what were their impressions at the very least? And those are just the oral histories that I've looked at. There are still dozens and dozens that still haven't been culled. So there are lots of witnesses out there that can still be added to this database. But the fact that someone will mention that I was with someone and Stephen never says, well, what was their name? Or can we get in touch with them or anything like that? And so we're dropping the ball even 60 years later.
Yeah. What a blown opportunity. My goodness.
Yeah.
Well, based on the interviews of the Warren Commission and then what eventually came later with the HSCA, even if they listed witness compared to the number that they actually listed, how much is actually benefited from people like me or others like Mark Lane that were out? I'm not comparing myself to Mark Lane. I'm just saying, but people that are actually interviewing and wanting to speak with these individuals about their experience. Because obviously, if you look at the Warren Commission testimony, if we talk about leading witnesses, did you see this or did you see that? Did you want to refresh your memory? Are you sure that's what you saw? Are you sure this? And then you always know you can catch them when they eventually say something like, I don't know, you tell me, because you're the one that witnessed it, right? I can't just influence your decision. But obviously, these films, photographs, and interviews that people have done on the side, Vince Palomera and others, William Law, that are able to get these doctors, whether they were at Parkland, recorded on videotape saying something. One, for example, is a testimony that wasn't taken by the Warren Commission or wasn't taken by the FBI, didn't even give a deposition to the Dallas Police Department, which, Craig, you have listed in your book, Walter E. Evans. Where you will find Walter E. Evans is that he gave an interview to his radio station, WFAA. And it's basic stuff. He was at Love Field and everything. He went to go get his film processed, but he arrived at the Texas School Book Depository at 7:00 p.m. And at 7:35, he talks about finding a piece of skull. So if you look at the sixth floor museum, that is in there, that he did mention that, but it wasn't questioned to him. He kind of just brought it up on his own. But there isn't really any footage or videotape stuff out there that comes to actually hearing his testimony. He wasn't called upon by the Warren Commission. That would be a complete chunk of history that would be forgotten, and it would be a whole story. So I'm wondering how much you guys really consider when you look at the Warren Commission interviews, you look at the HSCA interviews, and then you look at the interviews like by Mark Lane and others that were able to show you a more actual depiction of what these witnesses actually saw compared to what the sanitized version might be from the Warren Commission or the HSCA.
Yeah, there are times, and I can't recall off the top of my head, there were witnesses that testified publicly, the famous 52 that testified publicly before the HSCA that had testified. There were 9 of those 52, which is telling in and of itself. I mean, just think about that. About 20% of the HSCA public witnesses of those 52 had testified before the Warren Commission. Not exactly breaking new ground here, you guys. I mean, that's point one. Point two would be that the HSCA, in some ways, is no different than the Warren Commission. And it was so frustrating because you think, okay, here we go. And then all of a sudden you'd be reading the testimony, which was already rehearsed, and you could see the direction it was going before it ever got there. It's like, are you kidding me? I think the one thing the HSCA was not expecting, whatever your viewpoint is the acoustics. When that thing was discovered, it's like, uh-oh, now what are we going to do? And what did they end up doing? Yeah, we say it's legitimate, but yeah, there was a shot from the front, but the easiest one, it missed everything. Or even worse, probably Oswald fired. The HSCA does believe that, and there was someone firing behind at the grass, but they probably didn't even know each other. It's like, it just gets really weird really fast. So I don't think the HSCA really knew what to do when the acoustic stuff reared its head. I don't think they had a clue. And there were, we all probably have our favorite witnesses that we wonder why this wasn't really pursued. To me, the one is Robert Croft. He's in Dealey Plaza, and then I haven't looked at Craig's his book. I don't have it, but I'm sure he's there, Robert Croft, and he was a Mormon missionary. He got off at the train, had some time to spare, has a camera, strolls down to Dealey Plaza, takes some pictures, swear he took 4, swears one of them was at the time of the headshot, looks at his watch, oh, got to get back to my train, gets on his train, goes back, I think it was going back to Colorado. And the next morning, it's a knock on his door from the FBI. We need your film. Okay, that's weird because, one, how did you know he was there? How did you know where he lived? I mean, does that mean that the watchers are watching the watchers? Does someone get back on a train? I mean, this thing is just weird. And I've never been able to find out a whole lot about Robert Croft. I'm sure someone, I hope they had maybe contacted him. He could still be alive now. That could lead absolutely nowhere, but I think he should at least be contacted. I just don't know how to get a hold of Robert Croft. So you have that one. That's a very weird one on one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is you have what I call just absolute utter nonsense that for some reason the majority of the assassination community who believes in conspiracy tolerates it, and that's Beverly Oliver claiming to be the babushka lady. She goes to all these conferences, she sings the Star Spangled Banner, God Bless America, blah blah blah, and she's no more the babushka lady than I am. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. And how do I know that? There are pictures of Beverly Oliver in 1963. Look at her calves, my friend. She doesn't have fat calves. The babushka lady has fat calves. It's not her. Plus, the babushka lady looks more like Hazel than she does a 20-year-old Beverly Oliver. And yet, why we allow this nonsense, which is just nothing but a distraction at the end of the day? It just angers me. I don't know why people won't call her out. I interviewed her in 1998 and called her out. It was just me and her sitting at the table. She got up, stormed away, blah, 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 wouldn't talk to me again. Okay, whatever, have a sandwich, I guess. But for some reason, we allow that nonsense, and I'm not exactly sure why.
I'd love to see you argue that. I'd love to see you argue that with her, where it's like, you just look at her. It's shoe and then calf. There's no ankle.
So true.
So
it gets in the way, and it shouldn't.
So, Tim, to your point about Robert Croft, yes, he is in my book, and I recount Richard Trask's handling of Robert Croft, and I can't remember off the top of my head if he had interviewed him, because Richard Trask, the author of Pictures of the Pain, is an essential book, because
absolutely
not only did he track down a lot of the photographers, but also the photographers were very generous in giving him digitized versions of their stuff, full neg, prints instead of crop versions. And if the photographer had died, they talked to their spouse or their offspring. So I cannot say enough good things about Richard Trask. But back to Mark Lane and the filmed interviews, I think they are absolutely essential, because please remember that from 1963, it was Palmera and Lane and Weisberg, the forefathers of the JFK research community, that really did a lot of that work. And our knowledge of eyewitnesses and photographers come from their work. Now, even that has to be taken with a grain of salt. As much as I enjoy watching those interviews that Mark Lane had of these witnesses, that's in his documentary of the same name of his book, Rush to Judgment, we don't know how it was edited. We don't know the questions that were asked, because that's not on the tape. It is edited down to simply the witnesses' statements.
That's a good point.
So even veteran journalists who hopped off the press buses after they saw the chaos in Dealey Plaza and grabbed people and said, "What did you see?" And even that has to be taken with a grain of salt. You have to realize that they're working on shorthand, their notes. They're not recording in most cases. I'm sure some might have, but even that. So even today, when a researcher says that I interviewed this person, we still don't know, we don't know everything about the interview. So the excerpts sound really good, but once again, they have to be scrutinized just as staunchly as anything else. Me as a researcher, I'm weird in that I actually say to people, I have this interview, I transcribed this interview. If you want a copy of it, I will be happy to give it to you so that you can see what the context is. But with a lot of these investigations, Warren Commission, HISCA, and ARB, we don't have access to that, to the context of it.
Hey, Craig, quick question.
Yeah.
A couple years ago, and I think I put the URL in my book or something akin to it, that someone put together a map of Dealey Plaza, and it's in action. In other words, you see the dot, which represents, let's say, I don't know, and you see him moving as. Have you seen that?
Yes. The gentleman's name is Don Roberto.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is it called Dallas 63 or something like that?
Yes. And so it's an interactive one. I don't know if it's not interactive, but yes, if you see the JPEG or the GIF, or I don't know, I'm completely tech unsavvy. But yes, it moves, and you can actually see the witnesses and where they move to different locations, which is important because unfortunately my map of Dealey Plaza is static. So of course, what did I have to do? I had to say in my book, look, their positions are at the time of around the first shot, because I know that a lot of the photographers moved, a lot of other people moved. So if they were at Maine and Houston, they then went over and crossed the south grass on the grassy knoll to get to Elm Street, or further up towards the Texas School Book Repository. So that kind of map is again indispensable, but it's just nothing that I could do with my map. See, I couldn't put that much detail in my map. I simply wanted it to be a reference point for the motorcade and for the witnesses.
But you did that. But apparently, you did the next best thing. For example, Hawkins, I know, moves quite a bit, and so I'm sure you chronicle that in your book. So it's the same thing, just not a visual is all.
Has anybody had a testimony like Howard Brennan where they weren't where they said they were?
Well, yeah, but I just can't think of any off the top of my head.
But there is a couple that have like a similar thing where they said that they were one place.
Yes, but certainly no one with the celebrity of Howard Brennan, or nobody that was used as such fodder for the Warren Commission as the standard of the lone assassin.
The reason why, because doing the clips and stuff like that, you're digging through testimony, you get to learn a little bit. But Judith McCauley, or McCauley, whatever her name is, she worked on the 4th floor, and her original FBI statement talked about that she was on the 4th floor when the shots rang out, and then that she gave her statement about that, didn't see anybody on the stairwell, anything like that. But then if you look at the one that went like a year later in 64 when she was interviewed, she ends her thing by saying, like, she says she was on the steps of the TSBD, but then she ends it by saying she had furnished wrong information in the past to the FBI and on the day she was interviewed, when the day the shots rang out. Now, Bart Camp interviewed her daughter, and her daughter has always stated, and never went into full detail about it, but always stated that she was on the 4th floor. She was not on the steps of the TSBD. Now, I have photos of the front of the TSBD when the shots rang out. It's from one of the films. She's not there. And it's a wide shot, so you can see everybody who's crowded up front. But there's obviously, when it comes to a lot of people that aren't in the places that they say, and obviously we get back to editing reports and stuff like that. But when we talk about the importance of film and stuff like that, do you believe that certain films were taken from individual witnesses who were in Dealey Plaza? Obviously, you guys already mentioned one example, but I'm saying that becomes really relevant in this whole thing. And you got to think the president's coming to town. Of course, everyone's going to have their video cameras and stuff like that. And we can get into the importance of the Zapruder film and stuff like that. But on the base level, do you think that's necessarily super conspiratorial, that there's obviously things that people might have caught on camera where their cameras were taken? And then obviously leading to the point of when the ad went out into the paper about anybody that would have any footage from Dealey Plaza, if they wanted to bring it into the news station, was that just a way, instead of individual agents going to people's homes and taking it, it was a great way to have people obviously volunteer their documentation and their photographs, which eventually just got scooped up, and we don't know where half of those are. I think there's one witness, I'm blanking on her name right now, sorry, but Wilma Bond. She's mentioned in a 64 or 67 Life magazine article about taking footage, but they don't show any pictures or any photographs or anything that she took. So she's just a person that took photographs, but we're not going to ask her about her photographs.
I do know that a friend of mine, a really decent researcher, did some digging on this and discovered that, and he thinks whoever the babushka lady was this person that she was taking still photographs that day, not moving pictures, and that she took it to get them developed, and there wasn't anything on it. Now, who knows? I mean, that's whoever the babushka lady is, she is immovable, and she is tracking that limousine as it goes from right to left. Let me tell you. She is locked and loaded, whoever that is. Now, why she wouldn't have gotten anything at all seems a little odd to me, but I don't know. I think if stuff was confiscated, and the fact we're now in 2024, we're never going to see it. Is it possible that someone, you never know, took something that day and I was in a shoebox in the attic? It's certainly possible. I mean, it'd be a great find. I wouldn't discount it completely. Could be. I don't know. I'm hoping, but.
No, that we've discovered photographs like that, like Jay Skaggs, who was right by the Dallas County Courts building with all the sheriffs. His stuff was within the last 20 years was discovered. So yeah, we're still holding out hope every single day that somebody goes across their grandparents or their parents' stuff and they find these things that no one knew was there. Because another repeating theme throughout a lot of these witnesses, especially the ones that haven't come forward, they were reluctant to talk to their families about their experiences. But back to your point, Robbie, about Judith McCauley. Yeah. So she gives 3 statements, and one of them conflicts with the other 2, but the other 2 were consistent. The thing about that is she was with someone else, Avery Davis, a co-worker of hers. And Avery Davis is the one that confirms that, yes, they were on the steps. So when we look at photographs and we see someone's not there when they say they're there, that creates a problem. But then when you have eyewitness testimony, not just that she was on the steps, but also the person that she was with was on the steps, that adds something to it that has to be assessed. You also have to realize that I believe that Gordon Arnold was in fact on the steps leading up to of the pergola and leading up to the picket fence of the grassy knoll, although we don't have any photographs of him doing it. Simply because there's a lack of photographic evidence doesn't mean that they weren't there. It just means that the photograph was either poor quality, pointed the wrong way, a shadow covered someone because it was sunny, it was noon, so shadows are coming up and down. There are trees all around, bushes. I'm just saying this is why it does get frustrating to assess eyewitness statements, because of all the variables and unknowns that go into play. And
Gordon Arnold,
sorry,
real quick, Gordon Arnold is very frustrating for me. I tend to believe what you just said, Craig, and it's frustrating because we don't have any photographs. But he just seems so genuine and so sincere. And I know that's not provable, you know, that's the emotional thing. But boy, he sounds good to me.
No, I completely agree with you, Tim. And listening to someone's plea, that okay, that can certainly be conjured up. It can be acted out. I get it. But his was in fact the only witness that I've ever seen in a filmed interview where his reaction to thinking his life is in danger is indisputable. That he was taken by we're talking about the documentary The Men Who Killed Kennedy. He was shown a Jack White photo blow up of the Mary Mormon Polaroid that shows at the time of the headshot. It shows in the background the picket fence, and of course Jack White, you know, blows it up and sees the badge man, sees, you know.
But the HSCA didn't even trust Jack White. I think me and Tim talked
but
about
I'm just saying that when they interviewed him, they showed him a blow up. It appears to be a guy in fatigues. And Gordon Arnold didn't know what the source was. He said it looks like a guy in uniform. And anyway, when they reveal that it was he's shown in the Mormon Polaroid, he chokes up and says, if I had known that you had this, I would never have given this interview. I mean, it is so spontaneous and so genuine in his reaction. Very moving. So yeah. And to your point about Robert Croft, I think one of the reasons why Robert Croft was tracked down is because the FBI absolutely was, one of their priorities was as confiscating all of the photographs and film. So anyone who had a camera, you know, that was probably their priority. Not, let's see if we can find bullet casings or pieces of the president's skull, but we'll find who has the photographs because we want to confiscate them.
As I understand it, Croft claimed he got 3 of the 4 back, and the one he didn't get back was the one he swore was the headshot. So,
well,
yeah,
and I completely believe him.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah,
that's also with Orville Nix, right? That when he sent his videotape in to the FBI, or when he sold the rights to it, or something like that. The FBI took his film, and when they returned it, it wasn't the same. It was a copy of it.
Yeah. So the Zapruder film is not the only film that is under suspicion of being not necessarily altered, but sanitized or somehow edited.
Robert Groden, when I was doing my book, Robert Groden told me that the HSCA got the original Nix film, and that's the last anyone's ever seen the original. Long gone. And we know his granddaughter's been battling for years to try to get it back, to no avail, but of course not.
Now, what would be the significance of taking the Nix film? Obviously, it shows the limousine stopping, which matches what a lot of people, their statements talk about. It was either it stopped or it was a near stop, is usually what the witnesses described.
You know, if we're driving down the road and any of us turn around, let's say we're going 20, 25 miles an hour, we turn around, your first impulse is your right foot is going to hit the brake.
Yeah, 100%.
It's just a response. So did the limo stop? I don't think it came to a complete stop, but did he tap the brake? Sure. He looked, and we know it because we have the film where twice he turns around and looks in the back seat.
Absolutely.
I trust Palomar here because it's action through inaction. I don't think obviously the driver was, you know, whatever involved in the assassination. I don't think he turned around and shot anybody. I don't think any of that. But he obviously looked around twice. It wasn't just once. If you watch that film footage, he turns around twice to look at the president. He should have drove off immediately after hearing the first shot. But when we talk about obviously film footage and stuff like that, I want to get into the Zapruder film because I know we have probably different opinions on the Zapruder film. Mostly we base a lot of our evidence and a lot of how the shots are sounding or fired from a silent film based on the reactions of JFK and William Connolly, which we can get into. But what about the anomalies of the assassination when it comes to confiscated film footage? When I mention that, and I'm sure you guys might think of an example, or you can just add on to the one I'm about to give you, but Jerry Coley and Jim Hood talking about seeing a pool of blood in Dealey Plaza. We have one photo of that, of like a red stain on the ground, and it kind of corroborates with what they were talking about. But they gave interviews, thank God, and talked about that, yeah, it was a pool of blood, and yeah, someone did confiscate their film footage. It was FBI agents. But what would be the significance? Because the Warren Commission printed testimony that is way out there, where I'm like, we have how many people involved in Dealey Plaza? And it seems like everything you can possibly think of. I'm surprised I haven't come across a bear riding a unicycle in Dealey Plaza that some witness saw. But you're seeing a 6'7" man with blonde hair with a rifle in a case. You're seeing two people on the Texas School Book Depository. You're seeing one person that exactly fits Mac Wallace's description up in the TSBD window. You're seeing a lot of things going on where I go, you all are observing a different part of the same scene, but how can your statements range so wildly where the Warren Commission might have influenced some, but eventually they became so out there where they're like, fuck it, print that one. He said it the same thing he did. Phil Hathaway said the same thing this guy did. So yeah, print that one. It doesn't matter. But then why would they confiscate photos of a blood stain in Dealey Plaza? Does that match the report of a Secret Service agent being shot there? I don't know. I don't think anybody else was injured besides Connolly and JFK. But there is a testimony from a receptionist who talked about a Mr. X coming in that was bleeding. So I don't know, the confusion here. Why would be the importance of confiscating a footage of some wild?
There is also testimony of people saying that there had been a glass bottle of pop that was broken on that side, like a strawberry pop or something like that. I think
Well, they said a red snow cone originally in the newspaper.
Yeah,
exactly. So these are all elements that we have to take into account, and what's the most reasonable assessment of this all this evidence. One of the most interesting things that I don't think, please correct me, Tim, if I'm wrong, if you know, an interesting series of events is in the Art Rickerby series of photographs. He was one of the photographers who were in the camera car, jumped out of the car, and started taking pictures. There is a couple with a young child, has to be, based on the size and the fact that they're carrying him, no less than, no older than 6 years old, right? And the woman passes the child off to the man who continues to run down Elm Street towards the triple underpass. So were they in front of the Texas School Book Depository? Were they on the sidewalk or on the grass behind the sidewalk? Was the child injured, or did they think that they were in danger? I mean, it's a series within these photographs that is just very interesting. And one of the reasons why it's important, you asked, Rob, why would you want to confiscate any film or photographs that show something unusual? For that very reason.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that is unusual. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Rickerby is important. I mean, Rickerby gives us the best photograph we have of Umbrella Man.
Absolutely. And the dark complected man.
And the dark complected man, which they ignored him and went after Umbrella Man.
Right when you came on to the podcast, that's what Robbie and I were talking about, was the fact that I can't speak to Hiska's finding of and questioning of the supposed Umbrella Man, but did they even bother to look for his quote unquote partner?
They did not. They took the Rickerby photograph, blew it up, and posted it on the front page of every newspaper in the United States. Says, we're hunting for this guy. And eventually, I think it was Mary Farrell or Penn Jones or somebody said, "Oh, we got him. It's Louis Stephen Witt, who was working at an insurance company at the time." Like, what?
So it wasn't even Hiska that identified him?
No.
Wait, so why do you think he's suspected? Because he wouldn't give interviews to any other researchers or anybody to talk about it, but he was more than happy to testify.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Yeah, I know a guy who went to Louis Stephen Witt's house, knocked on his door, and Witt came to the door pointing a revolver at him. And said, "Get off my property." Witt, you read Witt's testimony, it is the worst sense of nonsense you can read in your life. Oh my gosh, this guy doesn't have a clue the layout of Dealey Plaza. He claims to be stepping on when he's actually stepping on a curb. But he claims he's stepping on a pergola. It's like, dude, you don't even know the land of the lay. And then of course they take him to DC and they interview him, and he claims, as you said, Craig, that he still has the umbrella from that day. In fact, in his testimony, he says, "I've got umbrellas in my closet, in my house, in my car." This guy's like the Penguin, for God's sakes.
Yeah, and then they ask him, "Oh yeah, bring one," to see if there was a flechette dart shooter in it. And of course, he brought one, and there wasn't one, so that debunks that theory, right?
Yeah, and a woman by the name Cynthia Cooper is the one who opened the umbrella. And of course, they make a big joke out of it. Stokes says, "Okay, we probably better duck before she opens this up," or something like that. And everybody's laughing. And then when she opened up, it reversed itself, and like it does sometimes does in the wind. Of course, everybody chuckled about that. And Wint, by the way, said, "Oh yeah, that's the umbrella I had that day in Dealey Plaza." No possible way you can prove that. Wint is a train wreck, my friend. Oh my gosh, he is that. Yeah.
Do you
He's
trust,
something else.
obviously, the researchers that originally talked about seeing the Umbrella Man and having their own theory about it was Josiah Thompson and Richard Sprague. Richard Sprague, the original person that probably should have been leading the HSCA and probably would have done a better job than Blakey. But I'm curious, do you guys think it was anything more suspicious? Because obviously, if you look at more of how the bubble top was taken off of Kennedy's limo, the person, I think is William Lawson, or not William Lawson, Winston Lawson, that guy, it was because it was raining earlier. So that's why it didn't go on there. So potentially, if someone would have thought it was going to rain again, you'd have an umbrella on you. I mean, I think it is suspicious if you're blowing it up and down, doing it what he did in the footage. That is very suspicious. I can't toss out the dart theory, and I know a lot of people go, that does sound insane. I don't think so at all, that it was a dart in that umbrella, but the church committee obviously exposed the CIA heart attack gun, which a lot of people aren't aware of.
Robert Cutler made that theory very, very famous. Robert Cutler had a lot of money, opened up a museum in Dallas for a while, and put out, self-published works suggesting that there could have been a flechette and all that. I don't personally buy it, and I think one thing that Craig keeps saying that I like is that when you look at the evidence, if you have all these witnesses, I think one thing you have to do is you lay it all out on the table. And are there going to be differences? Of course. That doesn't mean that anyone's lying necessarily, but what you do, you look for lines of consistency. And when you do that, then you try to do what's the most reasonable explanation. I don't think a flechette dart is a reasonable explanation any more than Witt's ridiculous theory about if I put this umbrella up and down. I'm sure John Kennedy's going to look at me with that umbrella, and he'll probably think, "Oh yeah, Neville Chamberlain, my dad was a Nazi sympathizer." What? How do you talk about connecting dots? I mean, again, this just gets ridiculous at that point. And it's what I call another nonsense theory, that we have to waste our time. You have to look at it. You have to look at all things. But at the end of the day, I just don't think the umbrella. But that begs the question: what was he doing? If I'm right that the Nazi sympathizer theory and Chamberlain is ridiculous, and La Flechette dart theory is ridiculous, he was doing something, So what does that mean? And I don't know the answer to that question. Not a clue.
Right. So just because we mention the possibility of an existence doesn't mean that we endorse that's what happened. Look, the CIA, we know, did shady shit, that a lot of which we didn't learn about until decades later. And they were, I mean, this is an organization that synthesized LSD simply so that they could study the effects on the mind by giving it in just heroic doses to other human beings just to see what the effect would be. Could we in fact establish a Manchurian candidate, someone behaving in a way that we can direct but that they will have no recollection of? So in the world of espionage, and especially the CIA, nothing is off the table. And the fact and that they could use an umbrella to deliver something, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but it doesn't mean that I believe that's the case. Just like with the guy who is standing next to him, it could have been a signal, as easy as a signal.
Right. His behavior is odd.
Right, of when to shoot, or it's a really big point of reference for assassins. So it's again, it is not beyond the scope of possibility.
I mean, my position is Kennedy was in office 1,037 days, and that is the only time in 1,037 days that anyone was that close to his limousine and they started pumping an umbrella and raising their fist in the air. What that means beyond that, I don't know.
But Robbie, you asked about the bubble top, and even if the bubble top had been on, it again, the point is it wasn't bulletproof. Look, as far as I'm concerned, there's only one reason why that bubble top came off, and that's because of John Kennedy's vanity. He wanted to be seen. He wanted his wife to be seen. She was just as popular as he was. And so you have crowds that are close, right, in proximity, I want to be seen.
I get your opinion on that, but the overall say when it comes to the president's safety, the final decision does not come from the president, it comes from the Secret Service. The Secret Service were already aware that there were already prior death threats to Kennedy. The fact that they did not keep the bubble top on for the president's safety, even if it wasn't bulletproof, it still would deter people. The same reason why motorcycle cops, those officers, were sent to the right rear and the left rear instead of being up forward. They were told not to go up past where the president was or past where those tires were. That obstructs a shot, if anything. It deters people from wanting to take a shot.
But my point is that wasn't the Secret Service that told the Dallas police motorcycles not to get next to the president.
Lawson was the one in the final decisions with Curry. It's in the documentation that literally states the fact that the president doesn't like loud motorcycles. That's his excuse, and they agreed with that decision to make sure that the cops stayed back.
But listen to what you just said. It was the president's preference. His like or dislike can be communicated to the Secret Service, and the Secret Service has to do it. Look, the Secret Service of today is not the Secret Service of '63. The Secret Service of today would not go out drinking at a bar 8 hours before they were supposed to be on duty. So
I don't know. Based on that Trump assassination, it seems like they really waited on that fucking roof for that guy. Seems like they just suck at their job.
No, I think his bodyguard was Clint Eastwood.
Oh yeah. Those cataracts kicking in hard.
The old retirees who have something to prove. Oops, sorry about that. No, yeah, but you're correct. I think that Kennedy had a lot more influence on the decisions having to do with being seen by the crowds. Look, he wasn't supposed to walk the fence line either when he got off Air Force One, but the Secret Service let him do it because, well, he's Kennedy.
Well, from Love Field to Dealey, 2 times from Love Field to Dealey Plaza, Jackie put her sunglasses on. He told her to take them off because he wanted her to be seen. You know, it was windy enough that her hat flew off a couple of times as well. She put it right back on. But he was all about appearance, no question about that.
When we talk about anomalies in the assassination, do you believe that some of these anomalies or some of these witnesses or people that were in Dealey Plaza doing odd things that either we haven't gotten verified, like the Umbrella Man, but others as well too? Do you believe that was set there for a purpose? Do you believe that was there for something as a distraction, or something that could, when you're looking at the record like we do now, we do have a lot of these things that are very influenced where you're like, why the hell is... I'll give an example, which is John Dolan. If you look at the photo of James Tagg on the underpass, like under the underpass, the spot where he was standing, if you look at the full version of it, there's a person all the way to his left. That's John Dolan. And John Dolan talked about seeing a guy with a ball in his hand, throwing it up in the air over and over again. It was an adult man. It wasn't a child. So unless it's Virgil, who, was called an idiot by a lot of people, mostly because he was deaf and just probably spoke weird. I don't think it was. I think that was something that had to be another thing that was going on. You have a lot of multiple factors of weird things that people are seeing where I go, that's not a normal day in Dallas unless they really do drink the water down there. I don't know.
I think what I try to remember, Robbie, is that the people there that day in the plaza were there to see the president and the motorcade. They were not there to witness an assassination. Having said that, the assassination only happened one way. And what we've been trying to do for over 60 years is trying to figure out what is that one way that it happened. Because once you do that, and I think part of the problem is we are so accustomed to look at it through the lens of the Zapruder film, which you have to. There's no question about that. But there were a lot of other films and photographs taken that day. And so what I try to do sometimes with my students, I haven't done it in a long time, but I used to, is plot out Dealey Plaza. And okay, here's Zapruder, here's Nix, here's Hughes, here's Bronson, whatever camera person you want to name. I said, we have to look at it from every vantage point to get the clearest view. If you only look at it through the film of Zapruder, it's only going to be a partial interpretation. As important as it is, but you still need to look at everything. And as both of you know, that is a long, tedious task to do. It takes years to get through all that stuff. So I guess that's my take, is I always say they were there to view a motorcade. Unless, Robbie, if you're suggesting that there were people purposely planted, you can't discount that. And then you just have to figure out who those people were and why.
Absolutely. So, yeah, so it's our job, like you said, after these 60 years, is to try to figure out these little mini dramas when the official investigative body should have done that. So we are tasked with doing something that our government had the resources and the money to do, but instead took that money and those resources and hid much of the evidence that now they expect us to uncover or to explain without the evidence that they should have provided. So yes, people went to Dealey Plaza to see the president, but I'll put a little asterisk in there, Tim. The people on the South Side, I don't know what they were doing.
I agree.
If you think of Dealey Plaza as basically 3 sets of parks, because there are 3 sets of lawns, to complete that pear shape of the entire Dealey Plaza. People who were on the South Lawn, that is on the other side of Main, up by Commerce, people were parked, people stopped traffic to get out because I have no idea why they allowed traffic to go from Commerce towards Main Street or towards Houston Street. I don't know why. Buses, cars, they were all lining Commerce Street. If you're stuck in traffic and you know the president's coming and it's going to be a while, you get out of your car. Maybe they had children. Maybe they were playing with a ball just to take their mind off of crap. But because that wasn't the part of Dealey Plaza that was photographed and filmed, we don't really know. So there could have been a lot of weird things going on in Dealey Plaza, or at least the south side of Dealey Plaza, that can be explained like that. But yes, it was not a typical day.
Yeah, the people on the South Side weren't even supposed to be there.
That's right. You talk about the Secret Service and their complete lack of controlling the area.
And the only reason Mormon and Hill are there is because they were dating cops.
There you go.
Well, it's like with Patrolman Foster, he was ordered not to let anybody on the overpass. But then,
and yet,
if you look at the Warren,
yet.
anybody but employees, but if you look at the Warren Commission's thoughts on it, they said that the investigative thing showed that there was only 15 people on there. I'm pretty sure I've done more than 15
there were more than 15
on witnesses there. So there's obviously a lot more. Now, there's a lot more railroad workers working than I thought initially. I thought there was only like 9.
And
Sam Holland.
Sorry. But remember that there was a building that was being constructed just 1 block, 2 blocks south of Dealey Plaza, the new courthouse, because the old red barn, it was a courthouse and they wanted a newer. And so there were construction sites going on at the time. So there were a lot of construction workers, pipe fitters, electricians, companies who on their lunch break came over to Dealey Plaza and witnessed the motorcade. But yes, so an officer was told keep people off the underpass or the overpass, but of course they didn't. But guess where they did vacate everybody until the time of the shooting? Behind the grassy knoll, the parking lot.
In fact, Alkins tried to get up there, and they asked him, was he a railroad employee? And he said, no, I have a press pass. He said, I don't care, you're not a railroad employee. In fact, the cops even asked Sam Holland, let us know who is railroad and who is not. And Holland said he did that for a while. He said, but at the end, people just flooded up there. And he says, I couldn't keep track of everybody to tell you who was who at that point. So yeah. I mean, it's the old Ben-Hur problem, the part of the roof falls off and hits, certainly if you're in the limousine, you're thinking that's not a good thing to see those people up there.
Now, if you think about a security issue, obviously having people up there would be a giant security problem if you're looking at from the Secret Service or just any protection of the president aspect, but also those are most of the railroad employees, the ones that were standing there, are the ones that saw smoke coming from behind the trees and obviously ran to the fence line. And those Mark Lane's interviews have shown that what they stated to the FBI was not included when they said that they saw smoke. It's also the point I mentioned in the beginning where it says using the Texas School Book Depository as a base point. S.M. Holland, James Leon Simmons, others that were either interviewed or had a small little deposition, their original thing became left or west, north, south, east of the Texas School Book Depository instead of being more accurate and saying grassy knoll. So besides that, revealing that the FBI has a template and what their questions have to be really based in, why are they the only ones that saw smoke? And I'm sure there's others, but those were the large, more focused ones that saw smoke coming from behind that fence line, and that they were interviewed, and they did state, most of them stated that they saw smoke coming from that fence line. Is that maybe why there was only railroad employees supposed to be up there? I'm not trying to get super conspiracy with it, but it's weird that there's...
But remember, there's also the other sense that people detected. They smelled gunpowder.
Yeah.
Even the people in the motorcade passing
Yarborough.
through. Right. Well, Yarborough wasn't the only one. I think that the reason why they are the ones that saw the smoke and very few others saw them is because of what their sight line was. Their sight line was right up towards the grassy knoll as the road is winding through. That's where their focus is, and that includes even peripherally on the left hand side, which would be the trees and the fence line. I just think it's uh, their sight line that allowed them to see it easily. But yes, there were other people that saw it, and certainly people who smelled gunpowder, which wouldn't have been the case if it had wafted out the almost upper floor of the Texas School Book Depository.
Well, smoke rises up, so if you're shooting from the 6th floor, you wouldn't have people on the 1st floor near the.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
I mean, not only did Sam Holland see smoke, he walked over there directly and went behind the stockade fence and noticed cigarette butts, noticed footprints. He did probably what we all should have done had we been there the day and do a little investigation, because he saw, that something isn't right here.
It wasn't just
he
him.
He never changed his testimony to the day he died.
It wasn't just him. It was Calvin Dodd, J.C. Price,
Right.
James Leon Simmons. They all went down there.
Yep.
And apparently Foster was the one that went with them, but Foster never said that in his testimony.
Well, that in his testimony before the Warren Commission. You mean he was never asked?
Any statements he ever made, he never. What he said is that he went down near the where Elm Street was, and he said that he waited for orders from his superior. I was like, well, everyone else has interviewed and said that you were one of the officers that went with them. So it's weird. I want to get into the Zapruder film because I think we all have a little bit of a difference of opinion on the Zapruder film. Obviously, it's the most historical film. I just asked someone the other day who's probably about to be 21 years old, someone I work with. I said, yeah, do you know who Lee Harvey Oswald is? They said no. I said, but I bet you've seen the Zapruder film. They could not remember it by name, but they do know what I'm talking about when I stated.
Well, yeah, social. I mean, it's a social icon.
But we base so much in a silent film of the direction of shots being there. And it's going to lead us into a little bit about the acoustic evidence, because I'm happy that I do want to talk about this, because I have Don Thomas coming either back on. His episode should be before this. But obviously, all the conspiracy, whether people believe conspiracy or lone nut, do not accept the acoustic film. I don't know your guys' opinions on if you would accept it or not. Tim, I think I know yours. But then also, why do we accept the Zapruder film then? Is it because we can visually see what's going on and we can see the reactions of people? That would be different than if we're talking about more of a scientific analysis of the shots. And also, people bring up the opinion of Dealey Plaza was like an echo place. So obviously there was shots being bounced all over, but I feel like there was a distinct difference between where you could see the shots compared to just an echo.
It is one of the people that the HSCA had testify in public testimony was David Green, and he was a psychoacoustical analysis person. And so he took, I think, 76 people, if I'm not mistaken, to Dealey Plaza, positioned them, and he said there was a very high degree of where the people said the shots came from. If they shot from the Texas School Book Depository, he said pretty much everybody knew that's where it came from. They shot from behind the stockade fence. And they had their backs to it, so they didn't see. But when a shot came from behind the stockade fence to simulate that, he said pretty much like 90% of them, if not higher, knew that that's where it came from. He said now he, being that's what he does for a living, was better than anybody there because that's what he does for a living. But he said even John Q. Citizen was pretty accurate. He also drew the conclusion through his studies that wherever you were closer to, that's where you went. Because you see people flooding up the grassy knoll, you see people flooding toward the Texas School Book Depository. He said, wherever you were closest to, that's usually what direction you went. He said, if you're closer to the grassy knoll, that's just naturally where you went. And you talk about looking at the Zapruder film. I came to the conclusion, and not because it was from my analysis, but it was from the analysis of Keith Fitzgerald, who presented at WEC 2013. In fact, I have the URL in my book, the exact spot to go to it on YouTube to watch it. And what he demonstrated, and I was absolutely convinced, if you look at Kennedy's head, and you have to get a close up to see it, about frame 327, 328, there's a massive wound to the right side in the temple region of the skull. We've all seen it. But then fast forward to frame 335, 336, 337, that area, about 0.7 of a second later, that thing is almost doubled in size. Like, what the heck happened in 0.7 of a second? Fitzgerald comes to the conclusion that Kennedy was hit from the rear. He was hit from the front at 313 and then hit from the rear at about 327, 328, which opened up and doubled the size of that wound in the temporal region of his skull, which also could explain why you don't see any blood on Conley's cuff in 237 when he's obviously wounded in the back and comes out his chest. So there's all kind of interesting things going on there. And I draw some conclusions in my book, but again, as you know, I'm not over the top on it, overly dogmatic, but that's seems to make a pretty good case when you look at those different frames. My God, that wound has doubled. What the heck happened in 0.7 of a second? And he may be onto something. Unfortunately, Keith Fitzgerald is no longer with us. He died fairly young. So we only have his one statement on it at WEC 2013, but it's certainly worth looking into. I mean, God, we've looked into other things. We might as well look into that. In fact, the HSCA, if you listen to the audio and just read the transcripts, Blakey's talking about frame 327 and that they're going to take a look at it, but they ran out of time. Bod was all ready to talk about it. I don't know what he said, but they ran out of time and they dealt with the acoustics and bypassed frame 327. But it's in the record that they were all ready to look at it. They just didn't have the time apparently, so which is unfortunate because I think there could be something there.
So Tim, you're talking about the acoustics and the gentleman who did that test in Dealey Plaza with how many people? How many people was it?
Oh, there was, I think there were like 76 people there, if I'm not mistaken.
Did he ever make a distinction between sounds that emanate if it comes from within a building and a sound which might emanate if it comes on top of a building? The echo must be different,
Oh yeah, no question about that. And they did all types of things. And he said, surprisingly, people were pretty accurate on where the sound came from. Actually, I just turned to my book. I wasn't even close. 178 people who indicated where the shots came from. And then,
and again, you realize that those people already know what's happening, or at least they know they're prepared.
Absolutely, they can say whatever they want, but you're waiting for the shot to be fired. Let me read very quickly here, just a couple sentences. Dr. Green stated that after the first sequence of shots, totaling 17 in number, they were in 94% agreement with the responses. He said, however, when you situated immediately in the test school book depository, which was our general location for the second sequence of shots, two things are rather confusing. You directly localize the source in whatever direction you were facing. The sound sweeps down the building and the apparent source of the sound is rather large. So he said at that point there was about 90% agreement. But you're right. If you don't say what you just said, that's a variable you cannot go without. Those people were there to watch a motorcade, not brace themselves for a shot. You go there, you're part of that experiment. You're just waiting for the shots to be fired and think, okay, where'd that come from? Big difference.
Right. So people's recollection that the first shot sounded like a firecracker might have something, like psychologically, because they're watching a motorcade, that's how they describe the shot. Doesn't necessarily mean that the sound sounded different than the other two. I'm simply saying, again, right. These are the factors that you have to take into account when you're talking about people's recollections about sounds and things like that. And that's why you take that evidence plus the acoustic evidence or tests that have been done, plus the accounts of bullets hitting the pavement, marks on the pavement, and a series of photographs that show that something metallic was pulled out of the south lawn. So you take all of this into account, and you say, what is, given the evidence, what's the best case scenario?
Right, I agree.
Or what's most plausible?
What about the statement from Buddy Walters? He never admitted to it, but in interviews with researchers, he was more than happy to admit that he found something that was a bullet casing or something that was in the grass.
Well, we have photographs of it. Both Foster and Walters. I'm sorry, it doesn't matter what your statement or your testimony says. We have photographic evidence that you did it. So why are you talking about doing something or not doing something that you clearly did? Because you asked Robbie earlier about people being places where they said they were, but they clearly weren't, or probably weren't. It's the same thing with things that people did and the actions that they took. So here we have a clear photographic record of Buddy Walters, who's a deputy sheriff, a seasoned deputy sheriff, allowing somebody who is still to this day unidentified come into a crime scene. That alone should have put up red flags. But the fact that Buddy Walters was about to pick it up, then he backs off and lets this unidentified stranger pick it up instead, put it in his pocket and walk away. If we were interviewing Buddy Walters and Joe Foster at now, of course we would show them these photographs, we would ask them about it. But when they were making their statements and when they were being interviewed, I don't believe these photographs were yet published or publicized.
Right.
I don't think they were in existence yet.
Yep.
So
now, how important would be Nellie Connolly's testimony, or is there any witness's testimony that would rival the Zapruder film? Because obviously the Zapruder film gets brought in on discussions or influencing. This is the overall say. This is what happened. You might have a memory of what happened, but this is what happened. We have it on footage. And hopefully we can talk about alteration. Do you guys believe that it was altered at any point? Obviously, there's various copies of this film that I think a lot of people were not aware of. It was circled in certain documents by Malcolm Blunt and Harold Weisberg, because it keeps getting mentioned over and over again. Copy of Zapruder film, copy of Zapruder film. So have we even seen the original? So that becomes the real question here when we talk about alteration of the film. What could have been altered? I've heard statements on certain frames where a father and their son are standing there across the field from where the Zapruder film is being shot, and the boy goes from behind the father to right beside the father in a split second, like if he teleported. So there are certain things where you wonder why what could have been altered out of the film, if you do believe that it's altered, and whose testimony would rival the Zapruder film, and when it comes to an overall say of what happened. I believe anybody in the vehicle. If Connolly says he wasn't hit by the same bullet that hit Kennedy, I think you have to trust the man probably knows what he's talking about.
Well, as far as the Zapruder film is concerned and its authenticity, the problem is that because of how it was handled initially and then handled by Life magazine, they set the precedent for disbelief and for sowing distrust in its veracity. So all of these conspiracy theories about that it was altered, the actual film itself, or that it was spliced, or frames are missing, unfortunately, Life magazine and the Warren Commission via the Secret Service, because that's who got the copies, they've already established that it happened. So all of these theories about the Zapruder film authenticity stem from that. The fact that, again, they fucked it up from the very beginning. So it just made very fertile ground for conspiracy theories. To put so much emphasis on the Zapruder film, I think it's because of where it was shot from, and it's at that point in time in 1963, it's relatively very high quality. It was a very good camera, it was very good film, and his vantage point was on top of a pedestal and just following the motorcade down. Of course, that's what we're going to focus on. But it is not beyond the realm of possibility, and other people have done studies of the Zapruder film also. Within the last 20 years, there was a documentary done on the National Archives taking either the original or one of the prints made from the original and digitizing each one of them, which is why we now have such super clear versions of the Zapruder film. So I can't speak to which generation of the Zapruder film that was and what happened to the original and who still has it. I was under the impression that the digitized version of it that we now have was the original. I could be wrong about this. But that doesn't mean that the original wasn't altered to begin with, or that as it was being processed or as it was being looked at, that something could have been altered in the film. But to place so much reliance on the Zapruder film, unfortunately, I think it's either we come to a consensus or it continues to be a distraction for everybody. Because obviously we know, Connolly was shot, Kennedy was killed, Other than that, this film really isn't much help, because we're even arguing today about when Kennedy reacts to a first shot, which was the missed shot. And if you think that Oswald did it, if his first shot missed, it shows what kind of marksman he was. You look from the 6th floor out into Dealey Plaza, and if you're shooting on the other side of the triple underpass to where Main, where Commerce where the viaduct meets with Commerce. That's where Tague was. So what was Oswald going after a pigeon to get some practice first, and then okay, now I got to focus on the president. So because it was silent, and because we can't even come to a consensus about when we do see someone hit and reacting to a noise or reacting to stimulus, the Zapruder film, unfortunately, is just this quagmire, this continuous, we're arguing about it. And just to put it out there, guys, if you look at frame 275, I still do not think that Conley was struck at 275, because the fact that he is completely upright, he's turned completely around, his cuff is showing, his Stetson hat is showing, so he's still holding on to it at 275, and that's a split second before the headshot. So, and we can argue about it, but that's the thing. We can't even come to a consensus about when Kennedy was reacting to a noise, when Kennedy was reacting to the shot, and then, of course, when Conley was struck. And was he struck by 1 or 2 bullets? So, because we don't have any sound, we don't know.
Tim, do you know why Bobby Hargis was not interviewed by the HSCA, or do you know why they didn't even bother reaching out to someone like that? Obviously, he gave a statement to the Warren Commission, but Bobby Hargis is splattered with blood, and that comes from Freeman's testimony as well too.
He wasn't the only one who was splattered.
Yeah, there was a few of them, but Freeman also in his testimony explains that he was way up front. Apparently, there was 4 more motorcycle cops that were way ahead. And he said he turned around and Bobby Hargis, covered in brain and blood, came up to him, and his statement's there. But Bobby Hargis, he was questioned, I think, a little bit about, was there blood on your helmet? And he's like, yeah, there's blood on my helmet. I think you can even see they put it, like, sold it at an auction or something like that, the bloodstained helmet. But they never really went into how could that be possible if there were shots from behind.
When I interviewed Blakey, this is way back in 1998, he made some admissions to me, and it wasn't maybe a great revelation, but he was just saying, look, there's people we should have interviewed that we didn't. Hargis was one. Bill and Gail Newman, he really resented the fact that they didn't do that. He resented that he interviewed Jack White, that's for sure. He thought that was just a train wreck. But yeah, he admitted to people that they should have done. And then by the time it got around to it, they ran out of money, because it was a select committee, not a standing committee, and so they ran out of money, and the rest is history. But I mean, where Blakey is at today, he still believes the single bullet theory. He still believes Oswald fired from the 6th floor window. He still believes the shot from behind the stockade fence missed. He hasn't changed iota. She certainly has different views of George Joannides and the CIA, that's for sure, because he knows he was lied to. But nonetheless, I think, yeah, exactly. I think for me, Robbie, when it comes to the Zapruder film, I tend to think that what we have is genuine. But like Craig said, okay, let's assume it's genuine. It hasn't stopped the bickering. It hasn't stopped the disagreements. We're still arguing over who was shot, when they were shot, I mean, that's never going to end. So I can't allow that to be the end all for me on how I interpret the data. I can't. I will look at it. I'll do the best that I can. For example, if you look at frame 312 and compare it to frame 313 of the Zapruder film, and William Hartman was called to testify, and he did this jiggle analysis thing. And obviously, there's times where Zapruder jerks because of the sound of the gunshot. And for years, everybody, myself included, would get up in front of people and say, guess what? Kennedy's hit at frame 312 because you can measure it. His head goes forward. And then he's hit an 18th of a second later at 313. And I used to say that. I'd go home that night thinking, what are the odds of that? I mean, it could have happened, but really, what are the odds of that? Well, now you're looking at the Zapruder film, and David Witt, who was a systems engineer out in Eugene, Oregon, had no real interest in the Kennedy assassination, does all this research, and all of a sudden says, oh my God, how did we miss this all these years? There is a smear, that what they call a photographic smear, where if you look at Conley's head in 312, it's elongated, like some superhero, and then 313, he's right back to normal, which means Zapruder probably jerked his camera. So instead of measuring Kennedy's head and saying it went forward at 312, it's probably not that way at all. It's probably just a photographic smear. And then 313, you're back to normal. So even if you think the Zapruder film is legitimate, you still have to deal with, I guess, what you call anomalies, Robbie. You have to deal with them. And they're tedious, but you got to take a look at it and then, draw some conclusions, I guess. But
again, so the photographic evidence fails us. What do we look at next? And what do we look at next is, of course, the reaction of Kennedy's body, which can't be a smear, can't be altered, can't be added in or cut out, only the extent to it. Then you got Bobby Hargis. Who is being hit and what pattern of blood splatter? So now we're talking about blood splatter, which really is the cool thing. Then how about where William Harper found the piece of skull? South Lawn. Where did he find that?
Right.
To the rear, to the south.
Several feet.
Right. So you take all of these things and then you make as good of an assessment as you can. And I know we didn't bring this up, but I have to, because we're talking about the headshot, the head wound, it moves. Don't you find it just fascinating? And I don't know that HISCA ever addressed this, or their wonderful forensic panel, the forensic pathology panel. The Warren Commission assigns a huge task to a bullet that is designed to do what it actually says it did: go through cloth, skin, bone, but to be able to penetrate two different people. That bullet was supposed to do that. Whether or not it did, or the bullet that was found was the bullet that did that, that's a completely different subject. But the very next bullet explodes on impact.
Yeah, exactly.
A thinner bone.
Well, then you get into the discussions of like Mark Chapman, where he's using two sets of ammunition, which seems to explain some of the...
When Clint Hill was interviewed just a couple years ago, he goes out of his way to make the point that the last shot he heard sounded a lot different from the previous shots. Makes a big deal about that. Now, again, another variable. But to me, if there's a theme to our entire discussion today, what I keep seeing over and over again that I hear all of us saying is that the more data you have, the better you can assess the situation. And if you focus just on one thing, that is a massive, massive mistake. You have got to look at everything. And once you realize how complex this case is, you have to look on neutron activation analysis. You have to look on acoustic analysis, photographic analysis, a ballistic analysis. There are so many different analyses that we have to look at. It takes all of us we've been under 30, 40 years, for goodness sakes. And I got to be honest with you, I'm 67 years old. I've been looking at this since 1975. I'm now, for the first time, maybe in the last couple of years, I feel kind of comfortable talking about the,
oh my God, it takes that long.
Yeah. Either I'm really slow, which is a possibility, or this is one complex case.
Well, here, let me put it out. We have wasted our last 60 years because, according to medical legal standards, Kennedy has not yet been proven dead.
Yeah, exactly right.
Because his autopsy, the fact that it was done outside of the jurisdiction of Dallas County negates it, but also the fact that it was performed primarily by unqualified people would have negated it. So had Oswald gone to trial, all they would have had to say was, give us the proof that he's dead with fingerprints, legitimate photographs, and oh wait, no, you can't do that because you've already broken the law. You've already tampered with the evidence to the point where it is now inadmissible in a court of law.
I mean, sometimes when I'm giving presentations at local libraries or in my class for my students, I'll show the back of the head autopsy photograph, and I'll say, "Who is that?" And I'll say, "JFK." I said, "How do you know that?" Now, I'm not saying it's not. I think it is, but if that's all you have, there's no indication. You'll see his face. You have no idea if that's JFK.
And the X-rays that HISCA published in their volumes cut off the only identifying thing on a skull: teeth.
Right. Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
So it could have been anybody's.
I want to talk about the benefit, or if you guys think it was a help or hurt to the whole research community when we talk about certain individual researchers. Obviously, we can point and talk about that there's issues with Arlen Specter, all these names on the Lone Nutter side. But if we examine as conspiracy people that do believe conspiracy, if we examine some of the conspiracy stuff, like Jim Garrison, Mark Lane. Obviously, there was helps and there was hurts as well too along the way. One area, like you just mentioned, Tim, where you're so difficult to research something and just one specific area because there's a massive amount in the case. Well, Penn Jones is the one that has made the claim that everyone puts on their wall, like laugh, live, love, which is that if you find one area in the case and you research the hell out of it, it has divided us amongst different individual theories, and people are very, attached to their theories and don't want to be proven wrong, especially if you spend 50 something years researching into something. But for the newer generation, people hopefully like myself that'll get interested into the case as much as I have, or want to take it a step further from all the work that has been done out there is a large swath of information. A lot of it is very, very good. I appreciate Mark Lane. I never really tapped too much into Garrison, but I can see the benefit of what he was looking at with David Ferry and other aspects of things. And I think another thing to bring up with Garrison is the fact that NBC was coordinating an assault on Garrison's investigation, which shows a giant media compliance in what the government was trying to, the party line narrative.
I don't mean to interrupt, Robbie, but also please remember that the CIA has in the Warren Commission has, or HISCA has, or both of them have it, CIA documents that were uncovered by the Church Committee that said the CIA had a division or a little squad whose only mission was to buy up or listen to or read all of the conspiracy theorists and to be able to counter them. So, yeah, I'm just putting that up.
Is that the famous 1035-930 document that Robbie?
Well, it's 1095-360. Yeah.
Not even close.
It's either 1035 or 1095. I'll let you know if you go and Google that, 1035 or 1095. One of them will take you to the conspiracy document. The other one will take you to a CIA document where they spent 20 pages researching consciousness and how to telepathically communicate through your brain. I found that on accident, which made me research more into psychic abilities and stuff like that. But they went into all that shit of like being able to project yourself in front of other people using your mind. And I was like, dude, what is the CIA up to? Like, I'm looking at the NSA's documents sometimes when I'm doing some of this stuff about the JFK stuff. And none of these agencies are talking to each other. They're all just talking trash on each other. Like, I don't think they're going to investigate this. Oh, I don't want this investigated. So make sure you talk to informant this. And the number of news people like Kent Biffle, he's listed on an FBI document as informants. And he was the one that was writing articles about Lee Harvey Oswald when he defected. He's the one that got a phone call, was able to communicate with Margaret Oswald a bunch of times. And there is a large amount of confusion when it comes to WFAA reporters and WDMT, whatever the news station is. Certain people have the exact same claim. When I say that, I don't mean like what they saw. I mean like Margaret Oswald would call the news station and specifically speak to Kent Biffle, Bob Jackson, this person, nobody else. She would hang up if that person wasn't there. I go, either she's lying or she's done it multiple times and developed these relationships with multiple newsmen. But somehow the same claim is being attributed to certain individuals of the press where they start to use that story as like, this is their go-to benefit of the assassination. They were there in history.
Yes, but please, again, please keep in mind that the FBI, one of its main motivations, one of its techniques, and whether it's COINTELPRO or not, one of its techniques was to snitch jacket. That is, put out either a rumor or direct or fabricated evidence that shows that somebody in the media, so certainly somebody who's trusted in the media, is in fact an informant, because that will immediately discount them and discredit them. So the FBI themselves even put out these rumors about journalists and about editors and about even news station managers. So just be cautious about that, about rumors about.
Yeah, Bob Woodward's famous article that I think was in Rolling Stone, where he said he come to find out there was hundreds of CIA employees working at all the major news media.
Absolutely. Putting out false stories. Absolutely.
Yep.
But I'm sorry, Robbie, to your question about researchers, specifically conspiracy theorists, and the pros and cons of that. Yes, every researcher and or historian has, to an extent, their own agenda. and they can be biased. They can really want to be right about it. And believe me, all of us want to be right, that we have not spent the last 30, 40, 60 years of our lives in vain, right? That we were on to something, that we weren't paranoid, that we weren't reading everything wrong. I get it. We're invested. But because of the fallibility of history and like eyewitness recollection, we do the best we can. Even my book, when I originally put this out in 1991, it was in 1995 that I realized that it was mostly wrong. It was unsupported. I had trusted the researchers that came before me instead of doing my own work. So in 1995, I basically started all over again. I created a file on each and every witness. Eventually, technology caught up with us, and I finally had access to collections, offsite collections in other states that I would have to have gone there physically before to see and to do. But now, with the benefit of digitizing and all of that, I had access to them, so I could do it right. So when I republished this in 2010, with a clear conscience, I did do a mea culpa in the beginning of it, telling people about, because they had bought my work. And I'm sure that they did what I did. They assumed that I had done the work. And if they based any of their presentations, public presentations, or any of their research on my work, I felt like shit. I didn't do it maliciously. I didn't do it, but mistakes are made. But that does not mean that Mark Lane and his last book, because it was a piece of shit, that then invalidates his first book, which was not a piece of shit. So, but I guess the overall,
I'm a little bit weary on Mark Lane because he was at Jonestown when all that shit was going down. So
I get it, and that does kind of cloud his veracity and his trustability. However, you also have to realize that he was the only one who came forward, only lawyer to come forward publicly to defend Lee Harvey Oswald and his family. And of course, the Warren Commission wouldn't even let him do that, even though Oswald was dead. He still had interests. He still had, well, his family that now had to bear the burden of something that clearly he didn't do. So Mark Lane wanted to be there to represent those interests, and of course they wouldn't let him do it. It's the same thing with Jim Garrison. I hate to be simplistic about it, but basically, Oliver Stone's message was, this is what the research has basically compiled over the last 40 years or 30 years. And here are some of the things that motivated Jim Garrison. And so we're giving you all of the different theories, not as one, that they all happened in concert, but here are the possibilities and the reasons why we believe that the CIA could have been involved, the mafia could have been involved, that Johnson could have been involved, that certainly malfeasance ran rampant in the Dallas Police Sheriff's Office and even the FBI, whether it's complicity or just straight up incompetence. But nothing can change the fact that he was the only person to ever bring a trial in the assassination of President Kennedy. Now, was he ultimately wrong? Yes, technically. But do you remember what the jury in his case said? That while he did not convince us or show us with the evidence that Clay Shaw was directly involved, he without a doubt proved to us that there was a conspiracy, that Lee Harvey Oswald did not do it, or if he did, he didn't do it alone. That's historic. So say what you will about Jim Garrison, say, whether the theories about him were true, about drugging witnesses or himself being shit nuts because of syphilis or whatever, he did something historic. So yeah, there are good and bad in all researchers, whether it's, who do you rather believe, Tim, or who would you rather read something written by someone? Would it rather be Vincent Bugliosi or Gerald Posner?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Well, for me, it'd be Vincent Bugliosi, just simply because he's a lawyer and he has a much better writing style than Joe Posner, but Gerald
Right.
Posner just seems very arrogant about it.
Well, Gerald Posner, he speaks when he shouldn't, in the sense of, and he suffers from the sin of pride because he couldn't possibly prove the off-cuff things that he says all the time. I'm sure he's a nice guy. Robbie seemed to have a nice conversation with him. Nice guy. But he just says things so matter of fact. I'm thinking, you couldn't possibly know if that's true or not. You know, and what you said about the movie JFK, I've been convinced for some time that if what you said is absolutely true, if you go into that movie and you say, well, this is anachronistic because the Beverly Oliver never even came forward until 1973, so it's post Garrison, so that's not true. That's not Stone's point. Stone is using Garrison as a metaphor for all the research up until that point.
Absolutely.
So if things are anachronistic, it doesn't matter. That's not his point. So you're not. That's just a straw man argument at the end of the day. He's just using that as a platform. Here's the evidence. Here's what we know as of now. In that sense, I think he did a pretty good job.
He did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
Because the movie itself, even if you're not a historian or you're interested in the JFK case at all, from a movie standpoint, it's a sensational movie.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, just John Candy's performance of Dean Andrews.
Yeah, that's a great matchup. I haven't seen JFK, but I was doing an Andrews clip and I saw that there was that matchup that Oliver Stone did. I was like, that's a perfect cast right there.
And the gentleman who played Joe Pesci. Joe Pesci played
David
Ferry.
That if you don't watch anything else in the movie, just watch the Joe Pesci clips.
Great performances. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a good movie.
All right. One thing here that I want to discuss, kind of we're coming up on closer to the 2-hour mark, so I want to get this, and then you guys can ask your own personal questions if you have. We're getting there. We're getting there. This is going to take us a little while on this one. Suspicious deaths. Obviously, lack of witnesses coming forward. Why that was so. What you guys do believe when it comes to if people just didn't feel like what they saw was relevant, or if there was more of a conspiratorial nature, because there are some articles and news things going out there about certain names and individuals that were passing away under weird circumstances. And then with that being said, about an investigation that should have been targeted towards finding and locating witnesses, trying to do what Craig has done and what obviously other researchers, Tim, you've examined the HSCA, why they didn't interview certain people. There should have been an investigation just trying to figure out who was where, why were they there, and open up a polling board for people to be able to step forward to say, were you there? Can we validate that you were there? That should have been done, because it seems like in this case, if you're trying to examine the trajectory of bullets, things that base down more to a scientific thing, a lot of people don't understand the terminology. So usually what can be said of like neutron activation analysis, that goes right over people's heads. So they're like, well, the government said it, so it must be the final line on some things. But when you're looking at something that's examining evidence and documentation, especially when you believe that the government was probably behind some alteration and certain things, witness testimony is your next bet. And the number of witnesses that were not interviewed, the number of people that we're discovering later, the number of people that are passing away. One of the guys from Bob Jackson, whoever the hell, there's still reporters still alive. I found a carousel girl still alive. She's old, but she's got a giant mural of Jack Ruby, so I'm sure she's not afraid of talking about it. So there's a lot of things where these people are going to be passing away. Especially all these years later, and it's probably best to get them on the record, because like with Sherry Lynn or Sherry Angel, whoever it was, I had no idea about this, but thank God Mary Farrell and I think Jim Mars or someone else had interviewed her. It's very dry interview, very boring. You can watch it on YouTube. There's supposed to be a part 2 that hasn't been released, but it's about like 45 minutes into the interview. She says something that I have never, ever even thought of. But when Jack Ruby was arrested, she talked about visiting Jack Ruby. And who was there was Bill Decker. And Bill Decker apparently was very empathetic to Jack Ruby, considering that when Jack Ruby was sick and lying on the ground, Bill Decker was there rubbing his head. That's fucking weird That is really weird. But she says that again, that's hearsay. But there's a lot of things like apparently he had all of Jack Ruby's like belongings in his office, like massage stuff that he would bring in. He was the one calling certain individuals, family members of Jack Ruby, to come visit him and calm him down because he was having these freakouts. Now that is completely different than the record and photos. If you look at Bill Decker, you would not expect it from that man. So there's a lot of things that can be revealed through witnesses. And I believe, I mean, what's your guys' opinion on having an investigation that should have been more targeted towards witnesses? And also, why was there a neglect of witnesses stepping forward? And how difficult is it now to be able to trace and get information when we're coming across witnesses that are dying every day?
I think one thing, Robbie, is that the reason we can sit here today and say the Warren Commission, the HSCA, whoever, didn't do a good job because independent researchers have done what they should have done. I mean, I don't see anybody on the Warren Commission or the HSCA that can produce a volume on the witnesses like Craig did. Why not? They had all kinds of things at their disposal, for God's sakes. Like, I never get the impression when I've read the Warren volumes or the HSCA, I never get the impression that these are people doggedly after the truth. Every time I'd start to read and study a witness to put in my book, it was like, oh, the fix is in. That's exactly what they're going down the same road as the Warren Commission went down. It's like, here we go again, nothing new. Now, the HSCA did uncover things new. And I've talked to people. The HSCA called a critics conference before they started interviewing witnesses and talking to them publicly. And they invited people like Mary Farrell and Josiah Thompson, Sylvia Marr, and just, okay, what are the issues that we should be aware of? And all of a sudden, near the end of it, Mary Farrell brings up the acoustics, said, I don't know if you're aware of the fact, but we have a copy of the acoustics, which we think may chronicle the shooting that day. And my friend who was there said, Blakey almost went ashen. He was not expecting it. It came out of left field. It was like, oh God, now what do we do? We can't just rubber stamp the Warren Commission. Now we have to deal with it. And here's why they had to do it, because Mary Farrell said there's dozens of these copies all over the place. They made copies of copies of copies. That was a big problem with the Dallas Police Department. They would either confiscate copies for themselves or make copies for their friends. So the acoustic stuff is out there. Blakey had to deal with it whether he wanted to or not. I don't think he wanted to, but once he did, I'm sure it was, now how do we, finagle all this and make it look like the Warren Commission was still right, but yet we're going to come up with something that they didn't know. That's always the big deal, especially, I teach philosophy. If you know the history of philosophy, it's the next philosopher comes along and he has got to refute the previous philosopher, otherwise he has no notoriety. That seems to be the trend. I think that's exactly what happened with the HSCA. Keep in mind that acoustic stuff just sat in a locker, in a filing cabinet locked, which originally was Jesse Curry's. And then I think the guy's name was Batchelor, inherited, and then come to find out, they sent a guy by the name of Jack Moriarty down there because of Mary Farrell, and says, we understand you may have something here. And the guy says, yeah, and he hands it over to him. And that's how the acoustics ball got rolling. But I don't think Blakey wanted that ball to get rolling. So my point is, why is it that independent researchers are doing, as Craig said, and you've said, this is what the government should have done out of the gate, and yet they did not do it. They did not do it, not even close to doing it. And we're still here 50, 60 years later, we're doing what they should have done. And that's kind of an embarrassment to them.
But I think to your point, which I agree completely, that HISCA's main priority should have been to completely discount the Warren Commission. Whatever goes before, you have to answer for. Maybe the reason they didn't is because they agreed with the Warren Commission a little too much. And speaking of Bill Decker, because what launched all this thing was the sheriff of Dallas.
Thank God you got a pencil. I'm just ranting.
Oh no, I'm writing notes. Mrs. Bill Decker, don't even know her first name, was out with the deputy sheriffs out on Main Street watching the motorcade. Her statement was never taken. How could the wife of the Dallas County sheriff, who was there and a witness, we don't even know her name, and her statement was taken. But
look, the Warren Commission had a limited scope of witnesses they could talk to, so they had to get the real witnesses. Okay, they had to talk to Ruth Payne, and they had to talk to Marina Oswald. They had to talk to people that had no idea or close to being in Dealey Plaza.
And Jack Ruby's mother. Yep, got it.
Yeah, her dental or his dental records.
But some of the Dallas, and I've been reading the testimonies of a lot of Dallas police witnesses, police officers' witnesses lately, and the thing that occurs over and over is that we were told to stand down. If we were not on duty that day, we were told to stand out from the building, look at it, but you were not a cop today.
Yeah, no, I have
Definitely.
one of the appendices in my book is eyewitness groupings, whether it's the employees from the Texas School Book Depository, all the ones on Elm Street lining the street, or of course the cluster of deputy sheriffs who were all out in front of their building on Main Street on the corner of Houston and Main. Dozens of them just standing there watching the motorcade. They weren't called into service or anything like that. But Robbie, to answer your question about the mysterious deaths of witnesses, Hiska didn't investigate any of those mysterious witnesses, did they? Which is odd because it was even during their investigation from 76 to 78 when some of their key witnesses mysteriously died before they could testify before Hiska. But the authorities on the mysterious witnesses, or at least the ones who have done the most work, was of course first was Penn Jones Jr. Using the Midlothian Mirror, his own newspaper, to propagate these cases. But also Richard Belzer is the comedian and actor. He's the one who put out a volume. Nobody else has put out a volume about the mysterious deaths of witnesses, and it's not a coincidence. No, Robbie, it's not a coincidence. But because missing in the mysterious deaths, not only file, and just the complete lack of likelihood that these many witnesses could die within a short period of time, are the almost deaths, the almost mysterious deaths of witnesses. The one that comes to my mind most recently was of the Tippit shooting. Warren Reynolds.
Yeah, I was going to mention the stripper or the carousel girl that apparently took the shot at him or something like that, and then she eventually hung herself inside of a jail cell with her own pants.
Yeah, but the point is that he was shot in the head
by the stripper girl who hung herself.
And the fact that he miraculously survived and then gave another statement completely contradicting.
Yeah, well, what would you do if you were shot in the head?
Well, but that's the point. We're not just talking about mysterious deaths of witnesses. We're also talking about witness intimidation.
They tried to Abe Lincoln him. He was like, "Hell no, I'm not dealing with that."
Absolutely, and who the hell can blame him? But that's the point. We so often overlook. We look towards the juicier. Was your testimony altered? Was this really your signature? Did you really say this? And these mysterious witnesses, and not realize that there was a whole panoply of witnesses that were physically assaulted and then changed their testimony, or intimidated in other ways that we don't know about.
I get getting shot in the head.
The shortest chapter in my book, Robbie, is chapter 38. Jacqueline Hess, who had the job of doing the mysterious death investigation. I got barely a page on her. Do you know why? They didn't do anything. They relied on the London Sunday Times investigation, and that was it. They did nothing. I was shocked. I was shocked. I thought, oh, this be kind of a fun chapter. There was nothing there. It was really sad. Yeah.
What's wild to me is the number of people that got shot in the head. I'm like, doesn't anybody care about if the person might want an open casket? It's like the only thing I could think of when it comes to a headshot where you could actually have an open casket would be JFK. I don't know why his face is that intact, because from the basis of the footage and everything that I've seen, it seems like his face would be largely distorted.
Well, okay, so there was a lot of swelling, but that goes down, kind of like the different stages of mortis, rigor mortis, rigor mortis. But but please do not forget that Martin Luther King was shot through his jaw. There was a huge wound to his jaw and his neck. He had an open casket. Yes, his face was a little swollen, but they did an incredible job on him. And of course, the embalmer who did John Kennedy did the same thing. They could have had an open casket. That's how good it was. And even Fred Hampton, who I've, Robbie and his listeners know about my foray into Fred Hampton, he was shot twice in the head, and he had an open casket. So.
Yeah, the mortician worked on John Kennedy until about 4 or 5 in the morning. Tom Robinson.
Yeah, but if you're still having,
filled his head with plaster of Paris, actually sewed in the skull fragments that he had, except of course for the Harper fragment, and the rest of the missing skull, and it was on the pillow, so you wouldn't see it anyway. But yes, He could have had an open casket.
But would it be messed with so much where you would cover up a back hole the size of like an orange, that a lot of witnesses talked about seeing and a lot of people at Parkland talked about seeing? I mean, obviously, when it comes to JFK's autopsy photos, it doesn't match a lot of what the witnesses' statements were. So if you're doing that while an investigation is going on, I don't see that's a big problem.
Yeah. Oh, it is.
Yeah. Yep. Hmm.
All right. No, I thought you guys have a little bit more thoughts on that one, but all right, fair enough.
Well,
fair
I mean,
enough,
about the extent of the damage to his skull, and that he couldn't have had an open.
For God's sakes, you watched the Zapruder film. In my opinion, when they measured the brain, or from what they did measure with the brain, in my opinion, he should have a brain that would be a lot less weight, not more weight than the average brain.
Yeah, it wasn't his. It was, and I asked Dr. Weck this pointedly in 1990 when I interviewed him. He said, because I said, okay, what's the average weight for a just a normal adult sized brain?
Right.
And 1650, right? And Kennedy's was what, 14, 13?
1500.
But some of it, and it's been fixed in formalin, and most of it was gone, and it still weighed that much. Yeah, the one that was weighed was not, because notice there's no weight for the brain when they removed it.
I think you had those numbers backwards.
The weight, okay, but the weight came in the supplemental examination of the brain on December 9th. So there was no weighing of the brain the night of the autopsy. So there's no. It's the chain of evidence. I wouldn't believe the photographs or Ida Doc's drawing of the photograph of that brain. I don't trust the veracity of the brain at all.
I will end
David Manti claims, and I have no reason to doubt him, I mean, he's the expert, not me, that when he did measurements of the National Archives, I think he's been there 9 times, that when his view of the Ida Doc's drawing is that it is a disrupted brain, but it's still pretty much intact. He said when he measured at the National Archives, there was about almost exactly 1/3 of the brain missing. The Ida Doc's drawing is a fraud then. There's no way around it. It's a fraud.
Absolutely. Plus all of the eyewitness testimony that said how much was missing. And that even the doctors who first saw him at Parkland said it was macerated, it was coming out onto the cart. So,
I will end on this one question for you guys, and then I'll let you guys be able to promote your links and everything. And I do appreciate the time you guys have given me through separate conversations. Tim, hopefully we can get one more in with you, me and you, because I've got some questions about the HSA. Thank you for sending me all those audios. That was epic. It's funny when you hear someone say, we got to go off the record for a second. Does anybody want lunch or something? And you're just like, this is crazy. You forget these are actual people that are doing this stuff. But when it comes to, obviously, a lot of the stuff we can point fingers at when it comes to the Warren Commission, FBI, and everything like that, when it comes to the actual investigation, how much would you really kind of criticize when it comes to the Kennedy family? We mentioned Vane earlier, but obviously a lot of things that have been kept from researchers who are just trying to figure out what's going on. And I get for good reason, you don't want to publicize certain things about your family, but there has been this obviously idea of Camelot that's been built around the Kennedys, which I do think hinders some of the investigative things that could have been done, such as certain acceptance of like, you have to go to Berkeley to get request access to be able to view this or view that. Well, I've come across at least 9 different things about skull fragments, where there's the Harper fragment, there's the piece that was found in that WFAA interview, there's a bunch of different things, one that was found on the C-130 plane that was apparently given to Berkeley, and then one that was found at Ford Company when they were repairing the limousine. So you have a lot of things where I go, none of this was either submitted into evidence or disappeared from evidence. Who was the last person to have it? Who was the last person to have the brain? I don't know if it was for private reasons, and I can't explain what those private reasons would be. I can only speculate. But obviously, the Kennedy family has done a very good job at either not speaking about certain things or keeping information private, which I feel like a lot of researchers and people that are investigating this and want a true investigation done would have benefited from.
Tim, I don't mean to buffalo my way in, but if you'll allow me, I can't stand the fact that, yes, there were so many concessions made to the Kennedy family, that they were treated like you said, Robbie, Camelot. So they were our royalty. They were our royal family. So all of these exceptions and concessions given to the Kennedy family, especially when it comes to the autopsy. Now, to be fair, Mrs. Kennedy would not have left Dallas without John Kennedy. That doesn't mean that she said, let's take him back home. That was Secret Service. That was the government, right? No, it was Johnson that says, I'm not leaving without the limousine and the two most important pieces of evidence, the limousine and President Kennedy's body. So it doesn't mean that he could not have had an autopsy there. It means that someone else made that decision. It was Jacqueline's decision to have the autopsy done at Bethesda, not that it wasn't going to be in Dallas. But somebody, of course, should have spoken up, other than Dr. Earl Rose, because he was a minority of one, to say, no, Texas law states that the body can't be moved. We can't break the law. As much as we want to mitigate your pain, first of all, nothing's going to, because you're still wearing his bloody clothes. You would talk part of his brain probably on there as well. But we have to do it the right way. No one said that. No one spoke up. So it was that giving the concession to the Kennedy family. And of course, when they went to Bethesda, initially it was Robert Kennedy, and I don't know why. I'm sorry, Robert. As much as I love him, he was the one that said he wanted a partial autopsy, not a full autopsy, simply an autopsy of the head, not the rest of the body. Because I think part of the reason was that they did not want it to be known that Kennedy suffered from Addison's disease, or the extent to which that wreaked havoc on the rest of his body, whether it's his bone density, his back, so forth and so on. But you're talking about the brain and the fact that they were missing. Sorry?
Wasn't that known, though, that he had that Addison's disease? Like, that was well
No,
publicized.
not at the time.
Well,
No.
Grant Stockdale talked about when he was a senator that they were helping him down the hallway and stuff like that. But also, Grant Stockdale was one of the people that miraculously threw himself out of a 13th floor window.
Mysterious death witness, yeah. But no, it was the Addison's disease. The diagnosis of Addison's disease was not until after he was killed. His back issues, of course, his near-death experiences, and the fact that he was given last rites twice before November 26, 1963. But no, not Addison's disease.
Johnson knew it.
Okay, Johnson might have known it, but the public didn't. And that was a time at a time when the press left personal things like affairs and medical conditions. They had again the confidence in the institutions and knew that was personal and didn't need to be publicized. But you ask about the brain because it was the discovery of other missing autopsy materials, including the brain, after it had been in possession of the Kennedy family. And I've told you this before, Rob, I'll say it again. I want a exhumation of Kennedy's body so badly, but mainly to prove my theory correct. That is, when Robert Kennedy oversaw the moving of John's grave in April of 1967, that was after the Kennedys had possession of all of the autopsy materials, including the clothes, the brain fixed in formalin, all of the photographs, x-rays, all of the autopsy stuff, put in a big trunk and given to the Secret Service. The Secret Service then gave it to the Kennedys. The Kennedys then wanted to donate it as a gift to the National Archives, but before they could do that, they had to inventory it. And that's when the several pieces of autopsy evidence was missing. And then mysteriously, Kennedy's grave was moved from its original position, like 20 feet, for whatever reason. I believe that Robert Kennedy took those materials, the missing autopsy materials, and buried them in the safest place he knew, so that when he finally got to the White House, he would be able to have those pieces of evidence to start a new investigation into his brother's death. So the brain obviously would show how many bullets hit his head and from what direction. The microscopic slides of the margins of the wounds would show how close the bullets were to Kennedy's body at the time, how far away, because the burning of the skin as a bullet enters shows you obviously how close the weapon is. And then finally, the photographs of the interior of Kennedy's chest with all of the organs removed would finally show whether or not a bullet even went through to be able to facilitate the single bullet theory. But today, the Kennedy family is still silent, which puzzles me. But Robert Kennedy Jr. isn't silent. He wants a new trial for Sirhan Sirhan because he doesn't believe that Sirhan Sirhan killed his father. He believes he shot those 5 other people in the kitchen pantry, but he does not believe that Sirhan Sirhan shot his father.
I meant to mention this to you, but your clip on Paul Schrade that we did, that got me a flag on YouTube.
Why?
Harmful conspiracy theory.
Oh, dear. Jesus.
which part was the conspiracy theory that he
Well,
was
you just
shot?
mentioned that he was shot, and then people thought that he was. Apparently, the issue they had was that apparently people thought, or what you said was that people thought it was RFK initially, and they realized, yeah, they apparently said that's a harmful conspiracy theory.
Okay.
So,
My apologies to YouTube. Anyway, so Tim, go ahead.
No, I agree. There is one theory, it's simply a theory that, the casket that they brought Kennedy back in, they ended up dumping in the Atlantic Ocean. A military helicopter hovered for about an hour to make sure it didn't bubble back up. A lot of people think that Bobby Kennedy, and I have no idea if this is true, put some of the materials, maybe including JFK's brain, in there just to get rid of it once and for all. I don't know. I know that this idea of the deed of gift they gave to the Kennedys that you mentioned, Craig, is just absolute nonsense. I mean, what you have to get special permission from Burt Marshall, the head of Harvard Law School, for a while, and of course that changes with time. But it's like what were they afraid of? Is what I would like to know. I mean, I know one time Caroline Kennedy was doing an autograph signing at some bookstore in New York, and they went in there before she arrived and took off every book that had anything remotely close to an assassination conspiracy theory about her father. Like she didn't know he was killed. I mean, come on. I mean, I think we can be overly protective when it comes to that. And if it impedes the investigation, then it is nonsense at the end of the day. I mean, we should be better.
And you talk about the end of the day. At the end of the day, it's not up to the Kennedy family. Legally, everything having to do with this case could be usurped by a Texas judge. If a case was made in court to have Kennedy's body exhumed because an official medical legal autopsy was not done, then a judge in Texas could in fact say yes. Over the objections of anybody, whether it's Conley's or the Kennedys, they have no legal say.
Nope. And look how the rest of the Kennedy family has turned on Bobby Kennedy Jr.
Absolutely.
Holy smoke. It's embarrassing.
Absolutely. So I don't know if that was their lesson. Okay, you obliterate our father, brother, and uncle's head in broad daylight on the streets of Dallas. We got the message. Okay, yep, Oswald did it. Let's move on. I get it. But again, they should not thwart attempts by other people, with good intentions who want to get to the bottom of it. They shouldn't thwart those attempts. They don't have to be the flag bearers for it. They don't have to initiate it. Like I said, they don't legally have any objection to any investigation that's done.
No, and it's always funny to me when any of them speak out. Well, I think the Warren Commission got it right. Really, you've read all 26 volumes. You know that. How do they just think by speaking it makes it so? Okay, it's just ridiculous. Yeah.
I want to give you guys a second to be able to promote your links, Tim, if you want to start off, and then Craig will end with you.
The only link I have is my book, which is on Amazon. And it's still selling there, I guess, hidden in plain sight. And let me just say real quickly, the reason I wrote it is because after 40 or 50 years, I wanted to put my thoughts down. If I'm wrong on things I put in the book, I will admit that I'm wrong and then change it if there's ever a second edition, which there probably won't be. But I have no problem with that. I think all of us do what we do because we believe truth matters, and we believe the explanation of this horrible thing that happened matters. And if my theory doesn't exactly coincide with the truth, that's fine. We're all, I think, just doing the best we can as we tediously look at all this evidence, whether it's me, you, Robbie, Craig, whoever. So if it, at the end of the day, I mean, I do believe there was conspiracy. If my personal theory is wrong, I don't have much interest in that. Do I hope I'm right? I guess as much as anybody does who has put as much time into it as any of us have. But I think there's greater issues even than that at stake. So, but thanks for having me on. Appreciate this with Craig. A lot of fun.
And I completely agree with you on two counts. Number one is if we make mistakes, we own up to them. But also the point that you made earlier, and now I've completely lost it. I'll get back to it. my book and schematic, the map of Dealey Plaza, are available at craigciccone.blog. Robbie will have a link in the bottom. And although I have not added anything to it yet, I also have fredhampton.blog about the martyred deputy chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party who was murdered while he slept. It's a fascinating case, and one I've spent the last 30 years studying.
You're telling me I had to schedule and plan all this, then I got to edit this, and then I got to include your links in the description?
Absolutely.
God,
Glad you'd be lucky I just have the two. But yeah, Tim, to your point, I consider my schematic and list as an ongoing project. It's a collective. So I encourage people to, if they have any suggestions or if they know of witnesses that are not in this book, I want this to keep going forward. This is not the end all be all. That's for damn sure. So yes, if there are mistakes or omissions, I absolutely want people to contact me and send me any evidence they have of new witnesses or to update some witnesses. So we do this, like you said, Tim, with the limited resources because we're all independent. We're not associated with any institution or funding. And the fact that we have been able to do, I mean, even like I said, Harold Weisberg, who couldn't get published by anybody because it was such a hot topic, such a third rail topic that no publisher would touch his stuff, even though it's some of the best researched stuff we have out there. He had to do it himself. His wife on a typewriter, single spaced, typed all 7 books, and he self-published it. So yeah, what we as independent researchers do to bring this case to light and to keep it in the public consciousness because of its historical importance and what happened to this country when John Kennedy was assassinated and the path that we took. It's absolutely important still.
And I appreciate it, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. I'm going to start a petition of raiding the Kennedy compound, looking for JFK's brain somewhere in the walls. Somebody call the Terminator, and hopefully we can get a petition started. But seriously, Tim, Craig, I appreciate the time you guys have given me to talk on separate episodes and also on this one. I think it's important for the community of researchers, and hopefully we can get enough people interested in the case. Thanks,
absolutely.
Everybody, for listening to this episode.
Thank you for what you're doing, Robbie.
I got to sign off the way I like to sign off. Come on now.
Well, now sign off the way you like to sign off and then edit it.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.